Welcome, 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 everybody. Part of our continuing series where we talk to activists, reporters, writers, professors, anybody on the left, anybody on the right, as long as they can form complete thoughts. And we want to present them to you unedited and unaltered so that you could do this thing that was popular back when I was in high school. It was called thinking for yourself. Maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't. With us today, it's our privilege to have Professor Wayne Journell. He's a professor of teacher education and higher education at UNC Greensboro. Find your way here. Teacher, he's a professor of the teacher education and higher education section at UNCG. His research agenda could be broadly defined as better understanding the current practices of social studies educators with respect to fostering ideological diversity and tolerance in their classrooms. It is my hope that through a deeper understanding of current practices, social studies educators can begin to address ways to incorporate more opportunities for developing ideological awareness and deliberation in their classrooms so that schools can fulfill their mission of developing future citizens capable of successfully participating in an increasingly pluralistic democratic society. There's 51 publications by Professor Journell. Some of his education was at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Virginia Polytechnical Institute, State University, and James Madison University. Very well educated. Some of the positions he had was an assistant teaching professor at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. He's also taught at the College and Faculty Assembly of NCSS, and he was a managing editor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Some of the research that he's worked on: becoming a scholarly journal editor, practical advice for editors and tips for authors, post-pandemic social studies, how COVID-19 has changed the world and how we teach, unpacking fake news. That's a good one. An educator's guide to navigating the media with students, teaching politics in secondary education, teaching social studies in an era of divisiveness, the challenges of discussing social issues in a nonpartisan way, reassessing the social studies curriculum, promoting critical civic engagement in a politically polarized post 9/11 world, and online learning strategies for K-12 teachers. And this is the white paper where I found the professor. But before we get to that, let me check in real quick. Professor, did I say anything wrong? Do we need to correct anything about your
I think
background?
you got most things right. I don't know where you got the 51 publications. Probably have a few more than that, but that's all right.
Sorry. We pulled this off online.
I couldn't give you the exact number, but I think it's over 51. But that's all right.
Over 51 publications.
Yeah.
But the rest is accurate. You've done a lot of research on the nexus between the fact that we live in politically polarized times in America today and how you teach that to students or explain that to students. Is that fair? That a fair amount of your research has sort of looked at the overlap of these two worlds?
Yeah, just my research focuses on civic education broadly, but specifically the teaching of politics and controversial issues in K-12, but primarily secondary education.
So let me get to the study here. It has been well established that controversial issue discussions are an integral component to high quality civic education. However, as the United States has become increasingly politically polarized, teachers have become more hesitant to engage students in discussions of controversial political issues. 2 decades worth of literature on teaching controversial issues has shown that a primary factor in determining whether teachers will engage students in controversial issue discussions is whether they feel supported by their school administrators. Yet school leaders have rarely been the focus of civic education efforts. This article seeks to bridge the divide by first providing a review of research showing the importance of engaging with controversy in K-12 education and the influence of school leadership on that process, and then ending with implications for school administrators who wish to support teachers. When did you do this study, and what prompted you to look into this? What were you thinking? What were you seeing at the time? What was the impetus? What was going through your mind where you said, this is something that needs to be studied and I need to write a white paper on it and I need to do it now? What was going on in America? What was going on in your mind? What drove you to do this at the time that you did it?
So this paper isn't actually an empirical study. It's a conceptual piece. It's, like the abstract that you just read says, it's been widely acknowledged within social studies education that teaching controversial issues is a quality component of a quality sorry, it's a major component of a quality civic education experience. But a lot of times teachers get concerned about teaching controversial issues, especially in this current age of political polarization. And one of the gatekeepers on their ability to do so is school administrators. And historically, the social studies folks and the school administration folks haven't really talked much together, right? We don't attend the same conferences and things along those lines. So this paper was an attempt to kind of bridge the gap, and I'm hoping to do more stuff moving forward. But to answer your question about when I really thought this was an important topic, prior to becoming a professor, I was a high school social studies teacher, and I had very supportive administrators. I had two administrators when I was teaching high school, and they were very supportive. And I taught high school government, and we engaged. I had a mixture of liberal students, conservative students, and we had a great time. We would discuss issues, controversial issues, elections, all the stuff that you would want in a high quality social studies curriculum. But as I became a professor and I started going to different types of schools, and of course, obviously hearing what's going on in the country and things like that, I started to see that not all principals are created the same. And when I did my dissertation research, which was on the 2008 presidential election and how teachers taught it, I looked at teachers at 3 different schools. And some of the teachers did well, some of the teachers didn't do so hot teaching that election. And one of the reasons why some of the teachers refrained from really maximizing the educational, power of teaching that election was because they were afraid of saying the wrong things, and they didn't think that their administrators had their back. So ever since then, that's always been on my mind of how can we bridge this divide between school leaders, and when I say leaders, I mean principals, district administrators, that sort of stuff, and the teachers who are on the front line teaching this material.
So you had done research. Your thesis to get your PhD was looking at the 2008 election. That's the Obama-McCain election. And that was for everybody right when the global recession happened, caused by Wall Street bankers who totally got away from any justice. That's not what we're here to talk about today. And what you're saying is that in 2008, you noticed an impact from political polarization. A lot of teachers were not willing to teach their students about the most important election in all of America, something I would think. I grew up being taught that as a kid. I remember being taught about the Reagan election, and I barely knew who he was, but it was important. And they tell you, you could be president one day, and here's how it works, right? And that cartoon parchment paper goes, here's how a bill is signed, folks. I remember all that. Yeah, very important. In 2008, 8 years before anybody's ever heard of Donald Trump running for the presidency, there was so much political polarization that public educators were scared to even discuss it in school. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's fair. And, not all the schools were the same. We talk a lot about school segregation in terms of race and things like that. But they're also segregated a lot of times in terms of political ideology, right? School districts are gerrymandered almost as bad as congressional districts are gerrymandered. And so the 3 schools that I studied in that particular study on the 2008 election, there was one large school in an urban area, and that urban area was, overwhelmingly for Barack Obama. It was a kind of a suburban/rural school that was about 50-50 for McCain, and the other half for Obama. And then there was a private Catholic school that was actually in the urban area, and the student body was about half and half for Obama and McCain, but the school administration was very against anything related to Obama. And so what I found was anytime that either the teachers or the students felt as if they were against the prevailing ideology within that school, they had a hard time discussing the election. And it goes back to, political communication theories called the spiral of silence. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Say that again?
The spiral of silence. It is Elizabeth Noel Newman. I mean, she wrote this back 1970s, and there was another edition back in like 93, I think. But basically, what spiral of silence means is that if you are in the ideological minority, it doesn't matter what your beliefs are, but if you feel that you are in the ideological minority, you will clam up whenever there's a political discussion being discussed. And, you know, that was true for the teachers in the study. It was also true for the students in the study. So if you were a McCain supporting student and you felt that the school was overwhelming for Obama, they felt like they couldn't participate, right? And vice versa. And so that, you know, that was an interesting aspect of yeah, you found it right there. Elizabeth Noel Newman. And you know, that spiral of silence is you know, something that, you know, I've written about in my work, but it's also been, you know, referenced in a lot of educational research recently. So.
Spiral of science theory is a political science and mass communication theory proposed by German political scientist Elizabeth Noel Newman. States that an individual's perception of the distribution of public opinion influences that individual's willingness to express his own opinions, which in turn affects the perceptions and ultimately willingness of others to express their opinions. The main idea is that people's influence one another's willingness to express opinions through social interaction. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So everybody's not cool with this idea. If I go out, everybody's a cat lover in my town. I start walking around going, dogs are the best. They're better than everything out there. I might start losing friends. I might start being not looked at very nicely, and that won't feel good. And I would feel ostracized. And so out of a willingness to be liked by others, which is a basic human function, I will modify my behavior so that I still stay liked by my community. And that is hardwired into all of us as humans, to want to be liked, to want to be seen as a productive member of the community, to want to be seen as a member of our group or tribe or whatever. So you get that threatened, people go very quickly to, I better do what's safe to fit into my tribe.
Or they just go silent. And what the spiral of silence theory has also found is that they stay silent until they get within people they feel comfortable with, right? You know, the political science research calls these folks political deviants, right? They're different than the majority political, you know, prevailing political thought within that particular space or community. But once they leave that political space or community and they find like-minded people, then they talk again. They feel safe to express their opinion. And so that doesn't happen just in schools. That happens, like you said, in any aspect of life, right? Whether it's your job or, you know, walking down the neighborhood or, you know, whatever. So if you're in a neighborhood and, you know, everybody has, you know, Biden signs on their yard and, you know, you're a Trump supporter or vice versa, you're not going to necessarily want to put your sign in the yard.
There's a lot of evidence of that. And there's a lot of evidence of people changing their opinions over time subconsciously to fit their neighborhood. And there's a professor called Liliana Mason, and she wrote a book. And basically, the theory was we're, you know, evolved apes, but we like being in tribes. We're hardwired to be in tribes. Babies are born ready to be taught. This is our tribe. And those people, however you define them over there, are not us. Now, in bad thing is that you can make that about racism and ethnic conflict. You could also make it about American identity, or, you know, it doesn't have to be on race. It's what you teach the child early on, but we are hardwired to fall into tribes. If you don't teach them one, they're going to find another one. And like the spiral of silence seems to explain a lot of that. Have you ever heard of the theory of the, I believe it's called the second idiot or the second public fool? Basically, there's this, I'm not saying there's a scientific person's name attached to this theory. So basically, if you have a concert and nobody's dancing, and then one guy gets up and he starts dancing, and he's kind of dancing weird, everybody looks at him like a weirdo. The moment a second person gets up and starts dancing, within a few minutes, you'll have like 5 to 10, 15 more people dancing. So it is the moment that there's a second person joins up, sends a cue to humans of, oh, this is acceptable behavior. This seems to fit with the spiral of silence, that you got to have some sort of support if you're going to really get an idea to spread. Otherwise, humans are designed to go, I don't know, I don't see a lot of people supporting that. I don't want to, stick my nose out.
Mhm.
When, if you noticed this behavior in 2008, did it strike you as strange? I'm imagining you've been around a while. Did you go, wow, that's different? I remember when we could have these kind of discussions. What's going on in America? Was anything like that going through your mind around this time in 2008?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would characterize it as strange.
Different.
Again, different. I mean, research has shown that this is going back, even before 2008. Just because some parents get upset over whatever, right? And a lot of times school administrators, going back to that aspect, we tend to cater to the parents who the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So it's a situation where principals and district administrators, they don't want people to complain. And I will say that what I think was interesting in the what I did think was interesting in the 2008 election is that to my knowledge, the 6 teachers that I studied, none of them got any complaints from parents or students or anything like that. But they still felt that pressure, and I think
Mhm.
part of that is due to social media and cable news, and when there is a teacher that does something dumb, right? There are teachers who do dumb
Of
things out there,
course.
and they
Of
and they teach,
course.
and they teach politics or controversial issues in a bad way. They go viral, right? And unfortunately, I think when situations like that go viral, for the average, rank and file teacher who's doing their job and doing it the right way, they see that one teacher that goes viral and gets fired, and because not because they were teaching politics or teaching current events, because they were teaching it wrong, right? But they see that and they say, I don't want that to be me.
Right.
And I think that has only increased since 2008. I think that's a big concern now with teachers.
I believe the term is chilling effect.
Mhm.
And what bothers me is that what you just described with teachers, I was interviewing someone, I think, a week ago, and they were saying that this up and coming generation is going to be the worst ever for democracy. And the reason is, don't speak up, don't put your name out there, don't debate, don't take a stand. Say what everybody else is saying. And if you don't agree, just shut your mouth, because you don't want to be the person to go viral in a bad way and have your reputation destroyed and your friendships lost and your family's weirded out and you can't get that job or you can't go to school. And so what we're having is, in a country that since Alexander de Tocqueville in the 1800s has been about freedom of expression and controversy and debating different ideas. And maybe I'm not comfortable with yours, but we have these discussions. To I'm just not going to say anything. I won't debate. I won't discuss. I won't participate. I won't let anybody see me participate. And I will send those signals out there that I'm scared to do that. So everybody else is scared to do that. So we get to a point where we have a society where none of the teachers and none of the students and none of the graduate students have the courage to ever say anything that isn't already popularly approved. And at that point, how far different are we from 1935 Germany?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a little bit different because obviously 1935 Germany, it's the state was putting down the speeches, and now it's the problem is when you and I were growing up, we didn't have everything on social media. That's the difference. And
Right.
so now it's almost more of a mob mentality to a certain extent. So I'm not sure the comparison between 1935 Germany is necessarily apt.
Fair.
I think we're in a new situation now where I mean, because I mean, every time somebody gets canceled for something, and people will say, "What happened to our First Amendment rights?" Well, we still have First Amendment rights, right? The government's not coming and throwing people in jail for their political speech and stuff like that. But we do have a problem in this country right now, and I agree with you on that. That people are afraid to speak their mind on certain things because of that chilling effect. But that's more of a social mob mentality kind of issue rather than a government edict or government like So I get what you're saying. I don't know if I would agree with the comparison.
Fair enough. That perhaps less useful example. Yes, the government did push it. The German citizens were also very enthusiastic,
Mhm.
and the government had to do very little encouragement. My favorite example is Crystal Nacht. The government encouraged a little bit, but the German people really went for it. I mean, there was a little bit of government encouragement, and then there was this much. Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do this. And so it was, at least at that event, I would say largely effective because of the interest of the public in pushing it. And I'm just wondering, do we get to, you can look at other examples, Pol Pot in Cambodia, the Cultural Revolution in China, the Cultural Revolution in Cuba. Is there a point where our American society, if the educators are not willing to teach debate, and none of the students learn debate, and none of the parents know debate because they came out of the same education system, do we get to a point where a majority of our population is terrified to debate and say anything in public and doesn't know how to, which is damn close to the way societies like China and Russia exhibit?
Yeah. So I'll answer that question, but I'll come back to the example here. I think the difference is in those examples you gave of Germany and Pol Pot stuff. It was pretty much a one-sided thing. Here in the United States, we're polarized, right? And people can be canceled on both sides, right? I mean,
Sure.
yeah. So we're almost living in two alternate realities in a sense in this country where, like for example, what is it when Bud Light had the transgender
Dylan
spokesperson?
Mulvaney. Yeah.
Yes, yes. They got canceled on the right, right? And then
Sure.
people get canceled on the left on Twitter all the time for
All the
saying
time.
something that. So that it's like I said, it's whatever tribe you're in, right? That's
Okay.
the thing. Now going back to your point, I think your point is 100% right about we need to be able to do this in K-12 education. I always go back to John Dewey, who was one of the foremost educational philosophers in the 20th century, and he always said that schools should be considered laboratories of democracy.
Huh.
And because think about it, where else are students going to learn these skills if they're not learning them in school? You're not seeing good examples of tolerant political discourse
Right.
on social media. You're not seeing it on
Right.
cable news, and increasingly you're not seeing it from the politicians themselves.
Right.
So we have to be doing this type of work in schools, and so and I think where the issue is not everybody sees the importance of that. Like when I go back to the school administrators, and it's not necessarily their fault. They're not former social studies teachers. This is why we've got to increase the dialogue between the civic educators, people like myself, and the school administrators, and let them know how important developing these skills of being able to deliberate and things are for society, but also important for developing these skills at the K-12 level.
I'm trying to find the article. There was a major corporation, I think, in England, and they were saying that they have to teach basic skills to their employees now. So they're getting these top level college graduates who are really smart at math or science or computers or whatever. And I'm trying to find the article, but basically it was they have no ability to argue with someone. If someone disagrees with them, they're horrible and wrong, and we need to cut them off and not talk to them. And it's so bad that these corporations are going, I can't run a corporation like this. So we have to teach these people how to actually talk to other humans and to have reasonable debates, because we can't expect any college graduates we're hiring to do this. You can type in lack of critical thinking is an issue for American corporations. And basically, over the last decade, a majority of American Fortune 500 companies have said that they've noticed a lack of what they call soft skills. Really, they mean critical thinking. There's no ability to think critically. There's no ability to reason or to argue reasonably with somebody out of basically all the college graduates who've come out over the last decade. And it's so bad that a majority of corporations in America and England are talking about how it's affecting their ability to have business. That seems to be a bad sign for a country that's going to be able to negotiate, compromise, come to agreement on political problems in the future, uh, it seems all connected to me. We have a lot of teachers who are rightfully scared to teach this stuff. Then we have students who don't know it, and then they grow up to become adults who don't know it, and then they have kids and think, "Well, I didn't know that as a kid. It's fine. You can not
Yeah.
know it too." And then we have a generational problem. I remember being in high school, and the last year I was a senior in high school was the last year they offered civics and government and debate.
Yeah.
That was like 25 years ago.
Mhm.
So to me, it seems related. Uh, did you notice an increase in political polarization in 2016? You're talking about polarization in 2008, which I find interesting because I'm in California. A lot of people said, no, 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 sorry. Everything was perfect until a man named Donald Trump came along, and he alone by himself, wrecked the whole thing. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's accurate. So I've started doing this series. Hey, 2008, there was polarization. Did you notice a massive uptick in polarization in 2016 compared to 2008, either at the public school level or at the university level?
Well, yes, but I'll go back to your previous statement. I mean, anybody who thinks that we weren't polarized before 2016 has a poor understanding of history. I mean, we did fight a civil war, right? And but still, but even you can look at electoral college maps from post Civil War all the way up to today, and the idea that we are a united states, by and large, we are a country of regions, right? The there's similar voting patterns in regions. Now, who they vote for has changed over time, right? But the Deep South has voted for a certain party, a certain candidate. The coast do, the Midwest. So we are a country, and to your point, Donald Trump didn't, start that by any stretch of the imagination. I do think Donald Trump broke some unwritten norms of civic engagement and things like that, that I do think increased some political polarization, or at least people's awareness of political polarization when he came on the scene in 2015, 2016. Um, you know, Even though we've been polarized prior to Donald Trump, I would say that politicians generally tried to stay above the water, above water a little bit. Donald Trump kind of, you know, with the name calling and stuff that we typically just didn't associate with politicians, at least at that level of running for president. Um, so yeah, I do think there was an uptick. In fact, there's research to show that there was a quote unquote Trump effect on
Right.
the schools, during the election and following the election. Uh, uh, Increase of especially students of color feeling concerned and fearful and stuff like that. So yeah, so I do think there was an uptick, but to your point, Donald Trump definitely didn't start political polarization in the United States.
I thank you. I appreciate that. That's partly why I started the series, was that I was seeing a lot of what I felt to be one-dimensional thinking, or just two-dimensional thinking. It was very simplistic. It was, we existed in this perfect state of nature, and then one man was able to break it down. I've never really bought into the boogeyman theory, where one human can make things bad. Like Hitler started World War II. I don't believe that. I think he was a bad guy, but I think there was a lot of background, environmental, economic, social situations that put him in a position for that. So I never really bought the boogeyman theory that one man can do so much damage. I think
or,
there's
or, or one person can do so much good. And within the
fair.
social studies literature, we call this heroification and buildification, and it's a rhetorical device that tends to happen, especially in the history curriculum. But I actually have a chapter coming out in an edited book that talks about it from a political standpoint as well, where we do place an inordinate amount of blame and respect on certain individual figures when it takes the masses to do all the
Right,
good and the bad, right?
right.
But that, to your point, yeah, so heroification and buildification is again part of the psyche.
I think so. Like, I remember being taught as a kid, we're all Americans because George Washington. He
Mm.
basically ran the revolution and won it by himself. It wasn't until I was in my mid 20s and 30s where I had my current opinion, which is that Benjamin Franklin, if we're going to go that way, which I don't agree with heroification, was actually the guy that won us the war, because without French support, we never would have won. And we had French support because of him. But he wasn't as cool or as dashing or won as many battles as Washington or as good a speaker. So we don't really, as a kid, you're told Washington, and then here's this other guy, Franklin. He's kind of on the side. Later on, when you realize how wars are won with massive amounts of supplies and materials and money in steady amounts, you see, okay, well, maybe there was more Franklin. How much worse was polarization in 2016, in your opinion, to what you saw in 2008? So that the public can get some idea of how much worse it's become.
I think it was worse. I think it was more in your face, right? Um, you know, whether you are a Donald Trump supporter or a Donald Trump hater, for lack of a better word, I think anybody can argue. I think everybody can agree that Donald Trump is a massive personality. Like he dominates the news more than just about any politician that we have. And so, you know, from his campaign all the way up to his presidency, um, I think people were paying attention to politics more and his rhetoric more than maybe they were in 2008. And as a result, and plus, let's be honest about Trump. He has a core group of, about 35% of, followers who, I mean, they will follow him do anything, right? Through fire.
Fair.
And so I think those parents trickled that down to those students, and they would come to, class, and everybody read reports of students in 2016 during the election, doing things like chanting things like build the wall" to, in front of Latino students and things like that. I didn't see that type of stuff in 2008, or if it was very marginal.
No, I heard of it. I heard of that chanting, build a wall in front of Latin students. That happened
Yeah.
at least at two different high schools in the South
Yeah.
during Trump's time that I knew of. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was worse. Now we could sit here and argue about the degree to which it was worse, but I do think it was a little bit worse, at least again based on my research from 2008.
That's what I'm curious about, because it's a lot of the series is trying to prove that it wasn't perfect before Trump.
Mhm.
He didn't just make it all bad by himself. There were, like Hitler, there were already problems on the ground. The environment wasn't working. There was a lot of really angry people, and he spoke to that. Uh, and then so I'm curious, just seeing like, okay, so if it was somewhat bad in 2008, so that everybody understands how much worse is it in 2016. And I think you're saying something very interesting. The level of polarization might be the same from 2008 to 2016, but the nature and the expression of it became much more volatile. Would that be fair?
I think it's fair. I also think I will say I do think the polarization, and this doesn't really have as much to do with Trump as it just does as a
Please,
society. I
please.
think I think the polarization has gotten worse, not just in terms of who we vote for or who we support politically, but we live different lives, right? They've done studies to show that in Red America they watch different television shows than they do in Blue America. They watch different sports, in Red America than they do in Blue America, and everybody focuses on the politics, but I think in some ways we are we're becoming different culturally too, and a lot of this is due to, again, social media. And social media gets blamed for a lot of things, but I do think this is a big deal, because prior to social media you did have interaction more often with people who weren't necessarily like you, right?
Right.
Now in social media, especially since COVID, when people were locked down, and we haven't gone, people coming back to work, it's been slow to get back into offices and stuff like that. People are living more behind their computer screen, right? And of course, I recognize the irony of talking about that while we're doing a YouTube podcast. It's, and
Yeah,
people are living behind their computer screen, and what social media allows you to do is unfollow and unfriend people who you disagree with. And so
right.
at some point, you end up in these echo chambers where you're only listening to people who agree with you, and that's not good for democracy either. And I think that might be, instead of blaming Trump, I think that might be a cause for why Trump came about. So it's like the old chicken and egg type of argument, right?
I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I like that you're merging the two of them. There's a lot of discussion in the popular media and amongst politicians, and it goes something like this: social media, social media, social media, gerrymandering. That's what's causing it all. If we get rid of gerrymandering from the evil Republicans or evil Democrats, depending on who you're speaking to, and we just reel in that, wicked Facebook and Twitter company, everything poof goes back to normal. And I go, well, hold on now. What about geographic sorting? That basically since the 1990s, 3 decades ago, Americans have been sorting themselves out into ideological, like-minded communities. Now, there's some debate on if it's people moving from California to Texas because they're conservative, which obviously there's some of that, or if it's, I've always lived in rural Tennessee, people are becoming more Trump voters. I'll just go along with it because that's what the neighborhood does, and I'm not very political. I just kind of see what my neighbors are doing, and I want to fit in. If it's geographic sorting, that's not going to become undone very quickly. I mean, that is a long-term generational cultural project of having people move back home or start to re-diversify themselves in their local communities. And a community that's all Trump voters starts going, well, maybe we should start looking at Democrats and being more independent. That's a generational project. And a theory of mine is that you don't hear that discussed as much by politicians or the media, because that means the problem is the American people themselves, and that the problem is only going to be solved through all of us jumping in and doing a lot of hard work for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's merit to that. I don't think it's a either or proposition. I think the fact that people are geographically segregating themselves ideologically for whatever reason, could be economic, could be political, whatever, is a problem. I also think gerrymandering is a problem. I don't think it's one or the other.
Right.
And we have a lot of systems in our government that allow for polarization. I mean, you can tell by when the country was created, the founding fathers, weren't necessarily thinking about polarization and things like that, because look at like the Electoral College. Again, you look at one of the Electoral College maps, it makes us look a lot more polarized than we are. Because of the winner-take-all system. But if you look at better maps, there's a lot of purple out there. But the way the way that the Electoral College is structured, it kind of encourages polarization to a certain extent, right? I mean, so there's it's then we play. And I'm just talking about the Electoral College now, right? But then it becomes like a shell game, right? If people move out of California, and they move into Texas, does that mean Texas is going to go blue? I mean, who knows? But the point is, it invites polarization. But your point about geographic sorting is key too. I just don't think it's a one size fits all.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I did overstate it. It's a combination of factors, but I just definitely noticed that there seems to be a lack of interest in talking about geographic sorting at the national level in the media and the politicians. And I think it's because it's a very difficult problem to fix. There's no clear boogeyman. The boogeyman is you. It's me. It's us. We can't point at them and go, there they are. There's the bad guy. And if we do this to them, we fix everything, which humans tend to like. This is more
and politicians don't mind the geographical sorting, right? It helps their reelections a lot,
Right.
So Democrats are going to want to keep New York blue, right?
Right.
Republicans are going to want to keep Tennessee red. I mean, or Florida red, or whatever the state may be. And even within the states, gerrymandering. I think I one of those people that I really think we need to do something about gerrymandering. But at the same time, both parties benefit from it to a certain extent, and so that's why there's not going to be like here in North Carolina, and I'm sure you've seen that our maps are pretty bad as far as gerrymandering goes. It's gone to the Supreme
I've
Court.
heard.
Like that. And it's given the Republicans, really I would argue an unfair advantage in the state legislatively. But there are a couple of Democrats who aren't exactly vocal about changing the system because they're in a very the way the lines draw, they're in a very blue area, and it'd be almost impossible.
Right.
So, people don't tend to vote against their own self-interest. Whether that's Republicans or Democrats.
What we're talking about for the audience is landslide election counties or districts, and where it's basic or a safe district. They're going to vote for a Democrat here no matter what. A Republican is going to be beaten by 20 percentage points. So basically, Republicans know not to even run. You can vice versa. This is a Republican district. Yeah, you can run if you want, but Dems always lose by 20 points. So basically, nobody's really going to run except for your crazy uncle who has some free time, which means they're going to win. So it's really like not even competitive elections anymore. And you're right. There's a lot of that. I would point out that when we look at the election maps, and I did this in some of the earlier shows, if you look at the election maps for presidency from 2000 to 2020, the amount of purple dramatically decreases. It goes from mostly rich purple to a very light purple with dark red and dark blue regions. And I encourage everybody to just do a simple color analysis from the year 2000 when they started the red-blue map on TV to the year 2020. They're available, and you can just see how it's less and less purple and more hardcore red, hardcore blue, which reflects what you're talking about, these safe districts where it's always a Democrat, it's always a Republican. Let me ask you, you started noticing a problem with political polarization in 2008. I'm imagining you never expected Donald Trump to come into power in 2016 and be super more polarizing than anything we had seen before. Do you think that it gets worse or better in the future? Do you see things that say, hey, we've seen how bad it was and people are going to calm down, or damn, it was 2008 and I noticed it, and then in 10 years later, they didn't learn anything and it got worse. And then 4 years later, they had January 6th. Where the hell does this go? Or, I think it's petering out. It'll be over.
Yeah, I wish I could be optimistic. I really do. I don't see it getting better anytime soon. I mean, just like most things, I think it's going to have to get way worse before it gets better. I really hoped, maybe I'm just idealistic. I had hoped that January 6th was going to be a kind of a reset moment, right? Like, ooh, that was bad, right? I was hoping, and I'll be honest, sometimes my political predictions are not always accurate. I thought that was going to be the end of Donald Trump. I really did. I thought that was, we had gotten to the, Trump had taken us here. We got to the precipice, and it's like, okay, that was bad. That was it. But I was clearly wrong on that because, as this taping, he is leading the Republican primary big time, right? And it's a very real possibility that he could get reelected, based on the current polling. So, I do think it could get much worse moving forward.
For everybody's knowledge, the Washington Post, and I think it was ABC or NBC or CBS television, ran a poll last week. Trump beats Biden by 10 points. That is destructive in an election. Normally you beat by like 2 to 4 points. Over 10 points is a smashing victory. So it would be a gigantic repudiation of Biden, which would scare the hell out of me, and I think most of the world. And that was last week. It was so bad, in fact, the Biden administration requested Washington Post and ABC or NBC TV to take the poll down after it was up for one day. So people are scared. People are worried. And I agree with you. I want to say this correctly. I was somewhat happy that January 6th had happened. Hold on. let me finish the statement.
You don't want any selective editing on this?
Yeah. End of movie. End of the story. Oh, I can't believe this guy said. Because, like you, I thought, okay, now they're going to clearly see the madness. Now they will clearly see how destructive this is and where this goes, and they'll get what liberals were talking about, and the MAGA people will go, oh, I didn't think he'd go there. Oh, now I get it. I see what you're saying. And for a week there, for 2 weeks, I kind of had some hope that, no, I wasn't happy about loss of life or destruction or fear. Or, I remember being captivated and terrified watching what I was watching on TV with my mom. We just sat there for half an hour frozen. Never did that before. But I thought maybe we learned. Maybe we stopped. Maybe we, when you see, oh my God, I went there. Oh, I didn't want that. And then for 2 weeks, I thought that. And then the Republicans started walking back their repudiation as a party. And I felt that the Republicans walking back repudiation was worse than January 6th, because now we had people who were the rational adult ones in the room as a party saying, no, it's not that bad. We're kind of cool with that. Yeah, that shocked the hell out of me.
No, I agree. And it's a shame. It really is.
I didn't think they were going to do that. I really didn't. I was shocked by January 6th, and I was 3 times more shocked that they walked back their. Boy, if people had bet money.
And then, you got principled conservatives like Liz Cheney, got clobbered in her primary. For even daring to go against. And so that's scary. It really
is. It is. And I have to say, yes, she was principled when it comes to Trump. Her stance on the Iraq war, getting kind of 1 million civilians killed for no reason who weren't tied to terrorism and they didn't need to die at all. She totally backed that, and it said absolutely nothing about her daddy or George Bush, which is basically considered an international war crime, worse than what Russia's done to Ukraine. So I'll just leave it there when we're talking about Liz Cheney.
Yeah, I'm never going to be on the Liz Cheney fan club by any stretch of the imagination, but I did appreciate any Republicans who did come out and speak out against Trump and January 6th.
Sure. I just committing an international war crime and getting 1 million civilians killed is also pretty bad.
It is.
I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, do you see it getting better? Do you see it was surprise? Barring some aliens come down and unite all of humanity, or Jesus, or somebody super charismatic equivalent to Jesus runs for president and is, we're all Americans, and bring short of some gigantic event like that.
I don't think it gets better. Now, I do think at some point Donald Trump exits the stage, whether he loses in 2024, he gets reelected and serves out his 4 terms, whatever. However he exits the stage, because I do think somehow he has created a almost like a cult-like status among a large percentage of the population that I do think I can't think of in my lifetime has happened in politics before. So maybe after he exits the stage, whenever that may be, things get back to a somewhat semblance of normal, but I'm not optimistic about that.
What I'm concerned about is, I remember when Trump was here and they said, oh, if we get rid of Trump, everything's going to be go back to normal. And I go, why? Because Mike Pence, who backed up all of his ideas, is now president? Yeah. I understand Mike Pence wasn't in your face and he wasn't as aggressive and he's a lot more courteous and respectful. I get it. But every horrible idea that Trump had, Mike Pence was like, And I'm like, how's that better to get a guy who backs all of Trump's horrible ideas, which we hate, but is better than Trump at implementing them in government? How's that better?
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good point. And I don't know.
I'm also worried about the next group of Republicans.
I guess my thing would be my again. I'm looking for any silver lining I can find.
Right.
But I'm hopeful that if the next person, even if they have Trump's value, won't have the cult of personality that Trump has, and maybe some people went out to vote for the first time for Donald Trump because they bought into him. I don't think they're necessarily policy wonks or anything like that, but they bought into him and his rhetoric, and I'm not so sure other people can, mimic that. Maybe they can. I'm hopeful that they can, but again, looking for any sort of silver lining I can find.
I'm wondering how much, if he goes, and even if he's in prison now, or if he suddenly disappeared tomorrow, I'm wondering if his ideology goes away. Because you see people like Ted Cruz, who went up against the Trump, saying the Republican Party is the Trump Party now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't want it to be, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
And additionally, it's 7 years after he was elected.
Mm-hmm.
And the Republican Party is still having a battle about how much influence he has. The guy hasn't been president in years. They're still debating it, like how much influence he has. That's a good sign for it's never going away. It's a permanent cultural feature of the new Republican Party. And if you want to win, you're going to have to speak to it, which means you don't get a win unless you start acting like Trump. And politicians will do whatever it takes to win.
They don't get a win within Republican primaries. What may be the breaking point if Trump loses in 2024, that'll be like the fifth consecutive election that the Republicans have gotten waxed on, right? Because here, let's be honest. If I was doing a political prediction, if the Republicans nominated anybody else on the debate stage tonight, right? There's a Republican primary debate. I think they win over Joe Biden. I think that if Trump is the nominee, I think Biden has a good chance of winning again, right? Because you mentioned a poll earlier. There was another poll out there that showed Nikki Haley beating Biden pretty soundly, right? But because Donald Trump is like the epitome of polarization in this country. People either love him or they hate him. I don't think anybody has like a neutral thought about Donald Trump. Right?
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We are definitely in a Trump world right now, and we still have yet to figure out what a post-Trump world was going to look like, because he hasn't left the stage even after he lost the election.
Right, which he did lose in 2020. Although just barely. As I like to point out, people go, there was not a repudiation of Trump. A repudiation means the American people voted for Biden at 60%. The guy got 52. He got 2% over half. It's not a repudiation at all. Sounds like Americans still kind of basically like Trump. And I've heard from a lot of people, if there wasn't COVID-19, Trump would definitely have won the election. I've heard that from many, many liberals and conservatives, that the only reason he really lost was COVID-19. And if he didn't have that, it would have been a great economy, smooth sailing to the presidency, which sounds like Americans would have backed him after all of his racist, sexist, horrible immigrant things. The question I have for you is, last week, Washington Post, an anti-Trump liberal hardcore newspaper, ran a poll amongst its readers, and it said Trump beats Biden by 10 points. Super mega liberal newspaper runs poll amongst own leadership. Trump beats Biden by 10 points. What does that say to you is about America, who we are as a people?
I don't trust any one given poll, right?
Okay.
If you go to the Real Clear Politics page, and they do the average of polls.
Sure.
At this point, it's still a horse race. In fact, the last time I looked, Biden was up by a point in their average of polls, right? So sure. any one poll, to go back to your point about any one poll, there was a poll in New Hampshire, which to me, when you're trying to predict a presidential election, national polls, it's not a national election. It is 51 small elections in a presidential election.
Sure.
And it always comes down to a handful of states, one of them being New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, that poll showed Biden up by like 15 points. So anybody can pick and choose a poll that fits their narrative. But when you look at the averages of polls, it takes that margin of error almost down to zero, right? And then again, even national polls, because the national poll is going to pull somebody in Wyoming, it's going to pull somebody in New York. Well, I'll be honest, I don't care what the people in New York or Wyoming think, because that election's already fixed, right? Wyoming's going to vote for the Republican candidate, New York's going to vote for the Democratic candidate, right? I want to know what the people in Michigan and Florida and Arizona and Georgia, all these swing states. I want to know what they think, right? Because that's where the election's
Sure.
going to be found. So, but to your point, it is a little bit disturbing that after all the things that Donald Trump has done, that he's been charged for, that there's still a sizable percentage of Americans that are supporting him. I don't understand it. Um,
That's
I
the
don't get it.
question is, what does that
Yeah.
say to you? Because even in the 2000 election, he basically had 47% of the electorate.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
damn near half. And
Mm-hmm.
we can fast
Yeah.
forward to this poll, and maybe it's wrong, but it's showing 10 percentage points. Imagine an America where there are more American voters who like Trump
Mm-hmm.
than Biden. It's not a
Yeah.
fluke. Just imagine it.
Yeah.
What does that say to you?
Says we're in trouble. That's what I think. I mean, I think that is because it's people have different disagreement, different beliefs and stuff like that. And as an adult, I understand that people disagree with things that I believe in, whatever. But that's why looking at 2016. I think there were some people who were willing to take a chance on Donald Trump because he was anti-establishment and he's coming out of nowhere. They thought he could rock the system and whatever. But to vote for him again, especially after the 2020 election, and he still denies the election and after January 6th, to me, that says something about the state of our democracy, not just, his beliefs versus my beliefs or anything like that, but it's concerning that people are not valuing, the legitimacy of elections anymore, if that's the case. And that concerns me.
Yeah, there's his popularity went up after he was tried um,
Mm-hmm.
and indicted, I think, about 3 weeks
Yeah.
ago. That really seemed to shock the hell out of everybody. He got all
Mm-hmm.
these
Yeah.
indictments, and his popularity went up amongst the American people and significantly amongst African Americans. That was
Mm-hmm.
something they did not expect at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it is problematic.
Yeah.
Stop the Steal was bad. January
Mm-hmm.
6th was bad. And he's at least as popular as he was as
I would
president.
say he's definitely still in the conversation. There's no doubt about that.
So it's more and more like what he said. He could kill someone on Main Street Avenue and it wouldn't matter, on live TV. Um, that being said, we also have the Durham report. Do you know about the Durham report?
I'm not sure. No.
So the Durham report is an investigation by John Durham, and it's on the official federal government's Department of Justice website. So it's on the official Biden administration
Oh,
Department of Justice
this is
website.
about the Hunter Biden and
No, it's about Hillary Clinton
okay, yeah, okay.
lied about Russiagate, faked the
Mhm.
dossier, and fed it to the FBI, who also lied and abused the FISA process in order to destroy a political rival based upon lies.
Mhm.
So they're basically saying she did it. Nothing's happened to her, and she really hasn't lost any of her fan club either. So the people who like Clinton, when I talk to them, I'm like, "Do you know about the Durham report?" Nah. And if they do, it's like, "Oh, that's just Russian mispropaganda." No, it's actually a fact. She
Mhm.
lied. The Justice Department said that. It's on their website. Nobody contradicts it. CNN backed it up. They just don't want to talk about it.
Mhm.
And yet that hasn't affected her popularity at all. Are we at a time where we as American people just like cult leaders, whether you're on the left or you're on the right? Nothing you say can ever take my allegiance away from my guy or girl.
I think there's some merit in that. I do think that we we would have to see if Hillary Clinton jumped in the primary, tomorrow to see how. I mean, to me,
Yeah.
it's a little bit apples and oranges. I mean, it's like, so I look at like the Democratic primary. It was a robust primary back in 2020, right? Biden barely got past Bernie Sanders. I mean, but it was they had to fight it out. Whereas according like right now, there is no Republican primary. It is. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't even have to go to the debates. So I do think there's always cults of personality. I mean, there's on the liberal side, people, the Bernie Bros, they love Bernie Sanders. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, but I don't
Good
think it's
point.
quite on the same level as the cult of personality that's following Donald Trump.
Okay. Winding down. Last two questions for you.
Yeah.
You're not you. You're not me. You're a third-party person watching this interview. They're watching this and they're going, wow, I learned a lot. 2008, polarization existed. I thought it started with Trump. Wow, I learned a lot. But they're struggling to remember everything that was said. But 5 days after watching this video, while they struggle to remember everything in the video, they go, there was this one thing the professor said, and it's 5 days after I watched the video, and I can't get that one thought out of my head. What is that one thought, Professor?
We need our students, our K-12 students, to be able to discuss controversial issues, political issues, in a tolerant way, and that's not a natural thing that people can do. They need to be taught those skills, and we need teachers to be willing to be able to teach those skills and have the support from district administrators and school administrators to do that.
Okay, that was good. That was good. You've practiced that, I think.
I've done it's not my first interview, but yeah.
Okay, not your first interview. You don't have to, but we always ask, do you have any recommendations? Is there anybody you know? They could be in academia, they could be an activist, somebody smart, at the coffee shop who might be willing to be involved in a political polarization discussion. You don't have to give anybody, but we always ask, we always try to keep the conversation going.
If you want to talk about like fake news and stuff.
Yeah, any of it, anything related to political polarization.
Sam Weinberg at Stanford University has done some great work. His Stanford History Education Group, they have done some great work on how to, deal with fake news and that sort of stuff. Also, one of his students is doing, if you can't get Sam, he's very busy. Sarah McGrew at the University of Maryland has done a lot of this great research too on civic online reasoning and how it can, help students understand, not just students, but anybody, understand fact versus fiction online, which to me is a key component to political polarization.
Is it Daniel or Sam?
Sam Weinberg.
Sam Weinberg.
Yeah.
At Berkeley?
No, it's Stanford.
Stanford.
Yeah. And then the other one was Sarah McGrew at University of Maryland. MCGREU. No, sorry, MCGREW.
MCGREW
yeah.
At Maryland. Let's say Sam Weinberg at Stanford. There he is.
Yeah.
And then Sarah McGrew at Maryland.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Was there anything you wanted to say about the work or the research or the topic and you felt you didn't have the opportunity to say that?
No, just that, I think that the biggest thing is it's not a simple problem to solve. It's complex, and it's going to involve some education of people and a lot of work.
I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming out. I will email you a copy of the video shortly, and I want to say thank you for your time, Professor.
All right, no problem. Good conversation.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a good one.
You too.